actually did a deck for today that I'm not going to show except occasionally. This is our new practice that Lisa and I, under pressure from her husband, have developed, which is to not put decks up in front of people, but to look at each other and talk and be a little less formal. But I do have some images and, kind of an organization to it. Hang on one second. There's Donna. And so basically, we're going to, I wanted to start out by talking a bit about some of the problems you guys have and getting a little feedback from all of you at the start. In fact, our mantra about bookstores are the cause, not a vessel for promoting other causes, came from Mike, my friend Mike, who's going to join us in a little while. And it's something that's really important to us. It's really helped us, and we did it via a survey, because Mike said, why don't you survey all your cohort and see what they really are interested in? And we were very surprised to discover that you were focused on the bookstore as a mission, which is like, it's like, well, there should be, conference for dummies, and we should have read it. And so anyway, what I wanted to start with is just to review a couple of points about how challenging it is to be a bookstore owner, which you guys know a lot more about than we do, except for Lisa, maybe. And I wanted to ask each of you two things, what a key problem for you that keeps you up at night. We used to use that as a strategy question when I was in branding. We'd say, what's keeping the CEO up at night? So that's one thing. And the other is to talk about goals. But so in other words, do you have financial goals? Do you have mission goals? Do you have goals in terms of growth or just more efficiency and stuff like that? So I'd like to start with Jill. I'm always picking on Jill, and ask those two questions. So what's keeping you up at night, if you are up at night, Jill? And what's the goal in terms of your store and your mission?
Yeah. The goal right now is just to try and figure out sustainability. Like, my husband's getting older and is probably going to retire in the next few years. Am I going to sell the store? Am I just going to hire a replacement employee for him and continue this way for a while? And then what's keeping me up at night is not being able to predict sales. First it was COVID and all of that, but we were doing really well in the first part of the year, January through May, and then June and July we had like 50% drop in our in-store sales for and we had other things that were making up of it for it. We have different income streams, but this whole concept of like the idea of Black Friday and that you don't like get into the black in retail till the end of the year. Is that really like how retail works? Are you losing money like the whole first 9 months and then you only make it in the holidays if you're lucky? It's just so frustrating to operate that way that I'm looking for other methods, like something else that we at least are breaking even throughout the year. And the only time I really get those bumps is if I get a big event. And with COVID now, I don't really want to depend on that. It's not super reliable to start with. And then COVID took it all away. So
one quick question, Jill. Is the issue seasonality that is repeatable? You can recognize the seasons?
I definitely have some seasonality. So Q1 and Q3 are our lowest seasons, and Q2 and Q4 are our better seasons, but like this was even lower than last year's low season. So
it's not just about smoothing it out, but it's also about just in general improving matters, shall we call it.
Smoothing it out is something just in general. I would like to try and figure out like what things can I do in January and in July that people will attend and do when they're otherwise not shopping at the bookstore. But also just predicting, like, because I'm trying to hire staff and stuff, and you hire somebody and then boom, your sales just drop like considerably and you're like freaking out. Like, can I really afford to keep this person or not?
Yeah. Sandy, same questions for you. I'm going to pick on you because hopefully you're not busy right now, even though 10 people walked in the store. So what keeps you up at night? And then what's your biggest problem? And what's your goal? What's your mission with your store? And you're muted.
She has customers, so she's putting it in the chat.
Yeah, I have customers. So all right, we'll skip you, Sandy, when hopefully your store empties out. We'll get you back on. Nora, how about you?
He just leaned forward the second you took it away. Like, wait.
Nora, do you want to, even though you're not the CEO,
Yeah.
you're an important person there. You know what goes on. Can you answer those two questions at all?
Yeah. I guess my big concerns are the fact that I am a recent college graduate.
You can't talk her for it.
Who is figuring out things as I go along, trying to
Robbie, she doesn't want you to go.
Trying to make sure that everyone we have in the store doing events is happy, making sure that we're having accommodations for everyone, and that we're able to give everyone who wants to do their event space to do so and that opportunity. So I guess those are my big concerns and things that are keeping me up at night.
And then what among your team do you share that's the goal, the ultimate goal? What is it, to have more than one store? Is it to make a bunch of money? Is it to pay people better?
I guess sustainability is a big thing. We want to make sure that all of our employees have fair wages, that we're able to be an ethical business when bookselling is such a difficult industry as it is.
Yeah. Maggie, how would you answer both those questions?
I mean, I think, it's all of the above. Like, we're looking to work to a living wage for all our employees. I think we're nearly there. We're also just making, and I know we devolved into this a bit with the last session, trying to manage making events profitable, at least covering their costs, but also being honest with the community and coming up with events that, both fill the niche of what our community wants, but also doing very big, higher profile, successful author touring events. So it's finding that balance between, A-list author events and being a community space and kind of threading the needle with all of that. But I think we've been doing a pretty good job in the last year or so of balancing that. And even if it means I have to say no to sort of more, we'll do it on consignment, small pub kind of things. I think everyone is a little bit happier with having kind of less events if they're going to be more profitable. And also trying to come up with things like adult book fairs, puzzle swaps, those kinds of things that bring in community members, which don't cost us a lot. And people get very excited about them. So just kind of thinking of new ideas.
Interesting. Sherry, how about you? And you're on mute.
What keeps me up at night right now, the two things is I still need to go back and finish my co-op lessons from Ms. Jill, which are really awesome and good. And I've got one on autopilot now with Simon and Schuster with their new program, which was awesome. It's like, yeah, here, do that for me. Because I know I'm leaving money on the table there. And actually, I really want to get into schools. And, the person that owned a bookstore in Somerville that closed like 10 years before we opened ours, she had come by the store. And of course, things were different then. And she retired and moved away. But she said, yeah, you got to get into the schools. You have to have a relationship with the schools. That's what kept us open. And I don't yet. And my daughter is even a teacher in the district, but I haven't figured out, like, I do teacher nights and try and encourage them to order from us. And some of them do, like, one or two will go. It's always after the thought, they'll like send the kids over, all of a sudden, 20 kids need a copy of Wednesday Wars, but the teacher never told us. It's like, okay, great. Let me see how quickly I can get those. And, so I'd like to develop those relationships. And I think it's just and then I had a weird situation last year with a school where they basically got me a whole list and said, should we just get these on Amazon? I said, no, I can do well for you. And like, I put together the whole quote for them and everything else. And then they took it and they said, this is great. And they took it back. And the principal authorized them to get it from Amazon because it was just easier. And they didn't really need to save money because then their budgets would be lower the following year.
Jeez.
I'm like, okay, great. So those are the kind of it's just quirky things that keep me up at night. Other than that, I mean, we're kind of going up. I have different low months, I think, a little bit than Jill, and I think I can probably attribute that maybe to tourism. So our suckiest months are January, February, but we did way better in them this year than last year. And then August, September. So I'm in the middle of sucky month now, where it basically goes down to still doing good on the weekends and book clubs and any special events. But basically I'm running 25-30% of people during the week. A lot of it's back to school and stuff. So
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, one key question, because the seasonality thing comes up, the good quarters and bad quarters. One question is, do you accept that as the way the business works, and you try and compensate for it some other way, or do you try and smooth it out and find ways to build those quarters up?
Yeah, we try and just take advantage of things that are already going on in town on the square and stuff and beef that up so that we're not spending a lot of money on things. And maybe that's when we get a local author in at the same time as they're doing Third Thursday or some Sunday festival on the square or whatever's going on. We're trying to just kind of usurp that without spending big on an experiment.
Yeah, which goes to the central tenet of new bookstores, which is community. It's not only about bookstore becoming a community center, but it's about the bookstore becoming part of the activities in the community as a efficient way to reach more people. Let's see, Donna, I don't know if Donna's there. She may be, we're just recording or listening. Oh, you're there. Hey, Donna, you want to speak to your store, your great store?
So the question is, sorry, I'm a little.
No, that's okay. We're all multitasking.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Sure, absolutely. So it's two questions. One of which is, what's the problem that keeps you guys up at night, you in particular, the biggest problem you have? And the other is, how would you express your larger mission?
So I guess one thing is, I'm always just trying to expand our reach. Especially, we have an aging demographic at the store. We have our regulars who come in and they're wonderful, but, we're really trying to reach, I think this is like every bookstore's big issue, trying to reach a younger audience and trying to bring in, especially the teens, the people who are on Book Talk right now. And, we have a Book Talk and we have TikTok, and we've been trying to, reach that demographic, but it is challenging. You really have to be putting out things constantly to try to get that reach and that attention. So yeah, that's what I'm always thinking about and trying to find a way to get to those customers.
And I've talked to Praveen. In fact, it was very revealing when I first met him. He had, turned you and he and some of the staff had turned Kepler's around from what was a pretty dangerous situation. And so I said, "Oh, you're doing really well. So you can open more stores?" And he said, "No, that's not it's not my mission. My mission is to improve staff salaries," he famously said. He says to everybody. And so do you guys still see that as your mission?
Absolutely. The mission is to, people ask us all the time, oh, are you ever going to open a new location? You should have one in, and then insert Bay Area town here. But the definite goal is to, improve, keep the store running as our singular store running as well as possible and improve staff wages. That's definitely the top priority, because it's just, Bay Area is getting more and more expensive by the day, really.
Yeah, by the hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which goes, that goes to the question of a poverty mentality, which a lot of small businesses have. I'm not saying any of you have that, but there is this struggle for sustainability that becomes kind of a business strategy, which is, how are you doing? Are you surviving? Rather than here's where we want to go. And that's always my experience with small businesses. And Lisa's had a lot of this, she has 2 or 3 businesses, is something where you try and think differently, but it always keeps you up at night. You worry about sustaining and surviving and being able to pay yourself, or not have to put money in, or whatever the heck your dynamic is. And it leads to kind of a very short-term strategy sometimes, and I think that's something that Lisa and I have talked a lot about, how outside forces, like people who have foundations and stuff, they're getting more involved, can help bookstores change that mentality.
And I don't know that it's all about short-term strategy either, Steve. I think a lot of us do have a long game and greater vision pretty consistently. The problem is there are so many, it's like when I hire a person, I tell them, there's nothing that we do here that's super difficult. There's just a whole lot of moving parts. And so with so many moving parts, there's so many things, this isn't a business where you can ever just fix it and forget it.
Yeah.
Whether it's inventory or your financials or your events or whatever, it's like laundry. It's just rinse and repeat. And you have to keep doing those things consistently, and then still find the time to try new and other things to add to the long game. And that's where it gets very, very difficult, because, okay, you get this thing established. Okay, good. And now if that thing changes, oh my God, now there's even more to do. And then, oh, I really wanted to try this, but I need one more clone to be able to do so. So that's a big issue too.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's also about just accepting the dynamic that there will be hard times. Every business has them. And it's not like you're going to go out of business. You just have a system to deal with it. Like a line of credit, which would be very helpful for a lot of. Let's see, Marissa, are you there? Do you have anything you'd like to do or say in terms of answering those?
Yes, I am here. No, but I think I pretty much agree with what everyone else is saying. And I know our main goals is to get us up to living wages, like cover all our expenses, so then we can do more of our community outreach type stuff, which is kind of the main thing that I know the owner wants to do, is get into being able to support all the charities we currently support even more, so we can do more in our community. I know those are the things we talk about over and over again, like, okay, how can we support these more, but also how can we have the business at a place where we are at living wages for everyone, and we don't have to worry about that necessary expense in personal.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Marissa, where is your store again? I've forgotten.
We're in Michigan. We're right outside of Flint.
That's right.
Yeah.
What most of us on the West Coast know about Flint is the water quality and Michael Moore.
Yeah, that's the big ones that most people know, but
there's a lot more, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a lot more. Like, I think this week it's called they have like Back to the Bricks, which with all the old cars and stuff like that, they drive all the way down like Saginaw Street back to the old downtown Flint and all the way through and everything. So there's a lot of cool things that we want to be able to get more a part of in the community, but it's having the time also where the store is not getting neglected and we have enough people and all that stuff, that it's definitely a balancing act that we have not completely gotten down yet.
Yeah, it's almost like Kepler's and Praveen's and Donna's mission of paying people better could be translated into having enough people too.
Mhm.
Almost everybody talks about how much they have to do themselves because they can't afford to do it, particularly when it comes to marketing, which is what this workshop's about.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think Lisa and I would love to know more about. If there was some way that we could quantify your hours, and you could say, I'm going to devote an hour a week to marketing, or I'm going to devote 2 hours of this employee. I mean, there's certain people like Nora who that's part of what they do, and the bookstore is big enough to have somebody devoted to it. But I think it's still a big issue, is like small businesses can't afford to do what big businesses do, which is to put up a lot of money for marketing. And so they stay small, or they stay less efficient because of that, but they're great, you know. Callie, are you there, or is it just Otter we're talking to?
I think we're talking to Otter.
I think we're talking to Otter. So they transcribed that question, and she'll see it later. Okay.
So Steve, what do you hope we get out of this time together today?
Two things. One, I wanted to talk about what are the simplest things that you and I can encourage everybody, and Mike, when he gets on, can encourage everybody to attend to. How can we? It's been great the way this group has participated, but there are 600 people that were in the original conference, and 300 that participated, and there's still those 300 on there, and only, you know, we get 10 to 20 people involved in these cohorts. But that's fine. It's great for our purposes. But for our purposes, we're trying to figure out what are, number one, a story tactic, because we're big into story, as you can tell. I'm sure you're kind of sick of hearing about story from us. And what can we do about efficiency, which is utility? So when somebody walks in the store, they either are browsing or they came from a book. The first is, it lends itself to telling a story that they want to read through. The second, the utility, goes to all the details that Jill, particularly in her workshop, works on about marketing and about click-through and measuring all sorts of metrics and then improving them. So hopefully out of this, and Lisa has one more session to go on narrative design, we can then present back to all of you, here's what we think is an achievable way to accomplish both those goals. Some simple things that can be done about newsletter in terms of just the logistics and nuts and bolts, which we have some stuff we could talk about today. And before that, this tactic that we're beginning to focus on, which is if you do a small story display in your store and you herald it, if you will, in your newsletter, you'll drive more foot traffic more efficiently, and you'll make your newsletter something that's more you know, like your book, something that people want to read, as opposed to a static event. How's that for a long-winded answer for two things?
So I'm anxious to dive into those and see what we learned today.
So what I think I'll jump to, hang on a second, I'm going to bring up this deck and jump to, since Lisa was asking the question, jump to Lisa's grandma post, which will start the story side of this thing again, which I think is a really interesting post. Hang on a second while I do this. You know, Zoom has raised billions of dollars, but they still haven't made this easy. Hang on a second. Here we go.
Well, I was inspired by Jill's roller coaster and our conversation last time.
Yeah,
so
yeah, and maybe actually for a minute, let me turn this off, and before we get to your story, Jill, is there any new news on that newsletter and how it did?
I was gonna log in and check it, but it needed to send me a code to my email, and then I got distracted. So I will.
That's an expert.
Look at the stats in just a second.
That's okay. All right, so let me go to Lisa's. Lisa, do you want to? I mean, what I've done is put your text in here, but do you want to just speak to it?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I was trying to there were 4 or 5 things that I wanted to pull in, and a lot of them are related to the concerns you just named. You know, we too are looking for how to get involved with the schools. And then I was invited to keynote along with the director of schools by our chamber president. So it looked like the director of schools and I were completely in sync and presenting together, at least to the State of the Schools conference. We had never spoken before, so that was pretty exciting. It's like now in the perception of the world and in the paper and everything else, it looks like Plenty is a key partner with the school system, but we haven't done anything with that. We haven't taken that anywhere. So we're sitting here with this ripe opportunity. And at the same time, a lot of people have been asking, what is Plenty? Why the name of the store? You know, and our staff is struggling to get their words around that. So that's branding, basic branding. And then this idea, I was inspired by what Jill did with the roller coaster and kind of the personal story. So I realized that the day that I was sending the newsletter out was what would have been my grandmother's 100th birthday. So I thought, well, there's, you know, this is a person that really inspired me, and I can tell a little bit about her because she's the person, and I don't know which things you're going to put up here.
I'm trying to find your in store picture, which I thought I put in here, but apparently didn't. I'll find it in a minute. You keep talking, I'll find it.
Well, so I mentioned in the story how I kind of began with my grandmother had time to teach school, cook for the county. Her backseat was always full of delicious things. She made endless cakes that were decorated beautifully. She directed hundreds of school plays. She did the high school annual for 60 years running, and everybody remembers spending winters in her basement or on a pool table laying out the annuals. And she had a retail store in town that sold dresses and elevated kinds of things. And she led Sunday school and did church, and there was civic activities. She had all these things going on, and she always had plenty of time to read to me or with me, or, you know, sort of this idea of plenty. So I said my grandmother was plenty. And I talk a lot in the little story about her recipes, that she read cookbooks like novels. And so one of the things we've introduced in the store is her recipes on tea towels. So along with our recipe, so what you see here is actually her recipe box, and then those recipes transferred to tea towels for egg custard and pecan pie and a lot of those favorites. You see also her cookbook that is not for sale, but I have a few of them because when she retired, she made a cookbook. I've paired it with Tom Lake and Ann Patchett because she taught all the plays and she really lived our town in a lot of ways. And then I've got a set of cards and a pen because I mentioned in the story that grandmother always had time to write lots and lots of letters despite her arthritic hands. She felt like it was really important to write. She even wrote in the cookbook, and she was a counselor and she did all of those things. So I did a few of these kinds of vignettes because it gets shopped, you know, I'm going to pick that up, I'm going to get that, and you got to be able to replenish it. So there's a lot of directions that I felt like I could go with a display that carried my grandmother. I could go host a scene, I could go, you know, great parties, I could go cooking, I could go plays, poetry, English, classics. But a lot of people, we got a 70% open rate on the newsletter. And a lot of people, I say a lot, I think I got 16 emails, which is not like a lot, but it's something who said, I'm so grateful that you put that in about your grandmother. And that was really nice. And so it was a connecting thing that encouraged me. And the important aha was like, if I'm going to put a story in the newsletter, I should somehow make it connect in the physical space. And then the problem is, how do you make that sustainable as it gets shopped all day long? You know, what else do you put in when you run out of this or that? And so to have kind of layers of display that did, and that's been really really popular and grabby. I did another one on the 3 mystery writers that were coming in, the Cozy Mysteries. We had a big tea party event on the weekend. Where we served tea and cookies and had everybody for Cozy Mysteries, which is a genre that doesn't get a lot of super refined respect. But it was fascinating to have these ladies in, and to know that a lot of the people that come in our shop are reading a book for the first time, maybe in their lives or in a decade. They're not readers. They're seekers. They want to be readers. Kind of like I go to the plant shop and I am not a plant grower. I just want to be a plant grower. So there's that. And I did one for a cohort that was visiting, and Jeff was here as part of that cohort. And I made
what's Jeff's full name?
Deutsch, and I made him. I made a display around his books and put things out like authors who also own bookstores, and another one that was like why we have bookstores, and another one that was how to read. How to read well, and the books that are associated. And that really got a lot of attention in the store in terms of people just cycling to that. So anyway, that's kind of what I've tried.
So Lisa, what you said touches on a couple of different things that, Steve talked about. So like, I put that story in the August newsletter, but part of that, because it was just about a roller coaster and I didn't tie it into the display, like when Steve asked me how it did, I don't have any statistics, because the open rate, like people decide to open before they see your content or not. Like, so it doesn't really affect the open rate. And I didn't have anything really in the store. And I don't feel like I got a lot of emails like that. August did pick up a little bit. So maybe they were like, oh, we need to go back and shop some, I don't know. But the other thing I think ties in is where, Steve was talking about the poverty thing. Like, the problem with some of these stories is they come to you last minute, right? And you don't have, like, they're much more authentic that way, but then you don't have the time to be like, I'm going to go really big on this Tom Lake book because I know my grandmother would love it, and I'm going to put the card there that says, if my grandma were alive today, she would love this book, and then you would have your 20 copies in the back that you would just be refilling the display, kind of thing. So I guess that's a challenge, Steve, is like, how do you have an authentic story 6 months in advance so you can order the things and still feel it when it comes time to come out and market it and promote it? Or the instant Lisa thought of that, should she have just gone and ordered her 20 copies and that's her display for the month?
I want to, if I may, Steve.
No, you can answer for me probably better than I can.
Well, this was you asked the exact question that Ashley and I asked when we sat down, because
Ashley is Lisa's store manager, right?
Ashley's the store manager, and she's like, I'm trying to get my head and connect this idea of connecting newsletters and display with our plan that I've got beautifully written in a Google sheet for our social media. And so we sat down and we're like, we really grappled with it, because stories should be authentic and and come up as they do, but we figured that we could plan some themes and find the stories within those themes. So at least this is what we're going to try for the next 6 months. So we looked at each month at what a theme might be, and like one month is kind of a theme of grief and loss and dealing with challenges that are really hard stuff. And our staff member, Stacy, has been through a year of a lot of really hard stuff. And so we've given Stacy fair warnings that we want to hear your voice and a story about how you got through all the really hard stuff, and what are the books that helped you, and let us order those books and get those kind of plan that story in advance. And we told a couple of other people, we want to tell your story, and kind of pick some themes, or that would be like, you can do hard stuff. We've got some fun themes too, but it was that's the right question, because it's really hard to go, how do I get the story and then align everything on it? And we said, if we're doing the 5-minute podcast, those should be thematically aligned. And so it is becoming, and hasn't become, we're still in the lab here, but it seems to be becoming kind of a string that we can pull, that we can go, okay, let's just, because grandmother let me pull on the schools and pull on, several things that we were trying to do all at once. So anyway,
there's first of all, your grandmother story has this great richness in part because of the recipe book. At my last agency, we proposed to Tate's Cookies, who we were working with, that they get everybody to contribute the box with the recipes, pictures of it, and talk about different recipes and share them, which is it plugs into a very rich heritage for all of us. I have my mom's recipes, in a small box like that, and she was an incredible cook. My grandmother was a professional cook, so we got all this stuff. And but the other part of makes it even more challenging to do it without some kind of prep, is it's also great to share this stuff not only in the newsletter, but then do it in social media but you have to adapt it a bit for Instagram or whatever you're going to use, TikTok or whatever you're going to use. So that's in a way defining a problem, a solution, and a problem is where is the time and the expertise and the staff to keep doing those things, and that even like Jill, in your case, and by the way, Mike Monello, my former partner and now the creative director at Campfire in New York, has joined us. And Jill, your roller coaster thing, you didn't even get time to put in the picture, which I thought was really key, so it's always a struggle like that. And speaking of roller coasters, Mike is, besides being a pretty incredible marketer, he's also an expert on Coney Island and carnies and stuff like that, which is
really I'm wearing my Spookorama Coney Island shirt today.
Yeah.
Dark ride.
So Mike, why don't you join us in the conversation? What we've been talking about is two questions I put to everybody, and they've all answered. One of which is, what's the problem that keeps you up at night, whether you're the CEO or just in charge of one area in a bookstore? And the other is, what's the mission? What's the ultimate mission? And for bookstores, a lot of times that second question is not so much about growth, but more about efficiency, so that it's more, because sustainability is a huge problem for bookstores and small businesses in general. And so the question is, what can we do to become more sustainable rather than have a border-sized network of bookstores that we ultimately become? I don't think that's anybody's exit strategy. And then, Mike, you've also, just so you guys know, Campfire, which Mike and I started together with a couple of people from the Blair Witch Project, is really an events company. I know it's not fair to say that, Mike, but in a lot of ways, it's a story and events company that does spectacular stuff, which when you actually are doing a big project requires a lot of people, a lot of freelancers. So nonetheless.
Well, yeah, I mean, the work we particularly do is beyond the scope of most of an indie bookstore in terms of budget, but the philosophies behind it are not.
Do you want to talk to that philosophy?
Sure. So yeah, so I'm Mike Monello. I was trained as a filmmaker, not as a marketer. I fell into the marketing aspect courtesy of Steve over here, who ran a production company at the time and scouted us out of Sundance when we were there with the Blair Witch Project. And he signed us up as directors. We did some projects, and eventually we kind of figured out that the real opportunity in the market was to help. The thing that the internet did was it brought the idea of participation. It also brought the idea of fan culture and fan communities. And the fact is that once the internet globally connected fans, the speed of culture just ramped up exponentially, as we've seen now. And because fans had such a large voice that spread so fast and was so easy for everyone to see and find and hear, it enabled, it gave people a similar level of power that you originally only had if you were an advertiser with big media budgets and could spread your message on billboards and TV commercials and things like that. And so that was a transformation in for just about every business. And we've been lucky enough to just kind of be at the center of that. So we've done a range of work. CampfireNYC.com is actually the company if you're curious about the work that we've done. But in terms of the philosophies behind it, for us, it's something that evolved over time. And Steve, you can jump in because Steve was intimately involved in all of this when we were developing the beginning. But for us, a core goal was participation. And the reason for that is because when you're marketing, right, everybody talks about impressions and this and that. And really, if you're marketing in a direct way, then it's about conversions, right? Like, did I placed ads on Facebook? Did it convert to book sales? But it's also from a brand perspective, or from the perspective of your store, it's about memory. And it's about, you have to put something out there that hits memory. You want people to make a memory almost, in whether they're in your store or engaging with something you put out, so because that's the area of the brain where you actually remember and recall things. That's where you create personal connections. And in order to do that, you need people to participate, because creating things that people will remember and emotionally connect to, like an Instagram post or something, is extraordinarily challenging. And even people who try to do it for a living are more miss than hit. But when you create areas to participate in, then it becomes interesting, because you get people who will raise hands and they'll involve themselves. So, it's hard to think about that, but at Campfire, we think about it as leaving white space for people to exist, right? So like one example is, that relates to books. We were hired by AMC Networks actually to promote their versions of Interview with the Vampire, the Anne Rice universe, which they've acquired, and they've put out a season 1 of Interview with the Vampire. Season 2 is coming. They released a season 1 of the Mayfair Witches. Season 2 is coming, and they're creating a new series based on the Talamasca. I don't know if there's any Anne Rice fans in the room here, but Talamasca is the supernatural investigation agency that links all of Anne Rice's story world between Mayfair Witches and Interview with the Vampire together. So we created an immersive experience at San Diego Comic-Con, which is, of course, the biggest kind of fan convention, and a place where there are a lot of book readers, quite frankly, even though the San Diego Comic-Con itself isn't known as a place that focuses on books. The big publishers do go there. And you do see indie publishers there as well. But for us, we created an immersive experience where we recreated the streets of 1920s New Orleans in this space. And we built these kind of stores from the 20s, like a music shop, things that relate to the narrative, and had actors in costume walking the streets, and people could go and kind of discuss with them and investigate. And at the end of the street was Lestat's house. And in the books and in the show, people leave these offerings in a ring of salt, because they think that they know that something supernatural is happening there. They know that they're living in a time when people are just disappearing, and they know that the residents of that house never age, but they don't know that they're vampires. And so in the books, there are some people who leave these offerings at their doorstep, in the hopes that the vampires or the supernatural creatures won't take them or one of their loved ones. And we just did it because it was part of the, hey, there's Louis Lestat's house, let's put that moment there. But what we didn't anticipate for or tell anyone to do was for fans to bring offerings, which they did. And it's remarkable, because it's essentially a flat with a door that looks like Louis Lestat's home, and a circle of salt on the floor. And for us, we laid down one set of flowers, and people just started bringing things. And fans actually wrote notes to Louis Lestat and the other characters and left them there. Some fans created mementos and tributes and left them there. And it was pretty remarkable, because some of the things that fans created were so cool. We actually took them out and placed them as set pieces in our experience, which of course made the fans that much more proud of doing it, and then turned around and got other fans to get even more invested in doing it. And I think that's an example of, like, when I say leave white space for people to do things, because when you create things that are like an invitation to people to participate, if they feel like the environment has been made for them to participate, they will. And it's remarkable what they'll do. And when they do, that's when you know you've made a deep impression, a memorable impression. And so that's kind of a one way of thinking about it, right? The other way is when you start to develop stories. And I know a little bit about how you all are developing stories. It's thinking about what can you do, ideally, perhaps in the store, that would allow people to participate. You know, some stories lend themselves really easily to that. Others are more personal. But you're always wanting to look at white space, and you're wanting to look at why some of these stories and experiences resonate with people, right? And so for us, we're often looking at culture and going, you know, Interview with the Vampire has deep LGBTQ themes in it, and the series explores that even further. And of course, you know, AMC's instinct was, it's controversial, let's not lean into that. And we kind of had to go back to them and say, no, we have to lean into that, because that's where your most passionate and connected fans are. And anyone who's offended by that is going to be offended by the show anyway. So why try to soften it, right? And it was fascinating because they ended up learning quite a bit about their fan culture and their fan communities that their data wasn't showing them. You know, in particular, the fact that the main relationship between Louis and Lestat is the main attraction for a huge swath of their audience. You know, because obviously if they had that data, they would have been telling us to lean into it as opposed to being scared of leaning into it. So, and you're right, I'm looking at the note, like Where's Waldo was built around this idea. And participation can be literally anything. It can be, you know, if you've got a place for people to add something, to write a thought and make it publicly available on a basic level, right? Sometimes you're if you're doing something a little more immersive, you're letting people you're figuring out ways to let people express things they already feel, but in a way that's more positive. So for example, we did a lot of work back in the day. Steve will remember this. We launched Game of Thrones for HBO. And one of the things we had to do is do some research into what is it about the readers of the books, that what do they love? What kind of fans are they? Because they're going to be the first ones that everybody online goes to figure out, is this HBO thing, Game of Thrones, good or not? And the people who read the books are going to be the ones who are going to say, it sucks, it's not as good as the books, or it's great, right? So we went in, and one of the things we realized is that fans of those books and fans of fantasy books in general, they lacked the language to properly advocate for it. So, you know, one of the questions we asked is like, these people love these books. They go, so do you recommend these books to people? And they were all like, sometimes, depends on the person. Like, how do you recommend them? And the language they were all using is trying to explain what the books are not. They're like, you'd love these books, but it's not like the fantasy that you think of, like Conan the Barbarian. It's different, you know, and they would kind of talk about what it's not, which is a terrible way to make a recommendation. And so we kind of went, okay, where can we find the commonalities? Because here's a group of fans who obviously want to spread the word, but they don't have the tools of the language. And we ended up creating experiences and elements and ways that they could connect with other connection points with people who had not read the books, right? So for example, we put food trucks on the streets of New York and LA that were done by Tom Colicchio. So we were attracting foodies, which is a connection point with HBO. And the food was all based in the world of Game of Thrones. So Tom Colicchio, we briefed Tom Colicchio on the worlds, told him about the flora and fauna. He created these dishes. We were serving them. And then what happened is we had fans of the books come out, and we had people who were foodies, fans of Tom Colicchio, fans who just wanted to know what HBO was up to come out. And the food was a central point to talk about the books, because the people who were there had never read the books, didn't know why Tom Colicchio necessarily made these choices, but the fans were able to talk to them about it. And so then the discussion became about the books and what's in the books and what's important in the books rather than what they're not, you know, and that's how we started spinning things. And so sometimes it really is as simple as like, you know, and when you look at marketing campaign like Dove's campaign for Real Beauty, right? That's an example of a narrative that was ready to take root and people were ready to participate in, even just by sharing it, by people saying, you know what, I believe in this. I stand up for this. This is what I believe in, and I'm going to share it because sharing it says something about me. And so it's always also, you know, important to think about what do people's part when you ask somebody to participate or you even put out an invite, what does that participation say about the people who are participating, right? Those are really the key elements. So, you know, when we talk about leaving white space, it's tricky because there's not a one size fits all rule that I can give you. It really comes down to the story that you're telling and then thinking about what this story means to other people and what are the ways that other people might want to, anything from as simply as endorse it to participate in it.
Jill,
Mike, I
you
had
have
a
a question?
Yeah, so you're working a lot with cult properties and engaged fans, you know.
Not all the time. A lot of times we're working with new properties where our job is to actually, you know, expose potential fans to new things.
Good. So maybe that, because like when I think about my bookstore, I've maybe got 2 or 3 people that I would say are true fans and have followed me to every location and whatever. But the rest of them, you know, everything I try and do where I get people to participate, they don't really want to participate. So I guess my question would be like, when you have the more casual fan, how do you get them more engaged? How do you get them to participate? Like, what do you have to think about to make it a safe space for them to participate?
Yeah, you know, sometimes what's interesting is that there's different levels of fandom, right? So when you say a casual fan, a lot of times, you know, people who consider themselves casual fans, they're not, you know, they're not role players. They're not going to go to they might not be the kind of people who necessarily go to an author event, even though they love the author. But they're aware, and sometimes when you connect fans with each other, their fandom deepens, right? And so sometimes it's about a space where a casual fan might actually just run into a deeper fan, and creating a space which bookstores already have, especially the bookstores with cafes in them, right? Already have spaces for people to meet and gather and talk. But, you know, again, it goes to sometimes it's other fans' engagement that attracts the people who are more casual fans, right? Like another example taking from Streets of Immortality. We did something really interesting. We had so there's a song that was written for the show that's written about in the book, and it's an original song. And so we had it turned into sheet music, and we hired a singer who was playing a role, and we put a piano out on the street. And sometimes we had a player, but sometimes we sent the player away. And the reason for that is because we knew with the sheet music on the piano and a singer hanging around, that fans who could play piano and read music would sit down and play. And then our singer would join in, and it would be these impromptu collaborative moments, and fans would gather around whenever they saw that. And it would be much bigger than when it was just our actors performing, because people would see that as a spontaneous moment and they felt like they were taking part in something special. And it was pretty remarkable how many people, like even we thought maybe it'll happen 5 or 6 times. And it was happening like daily, multiple times, you know? And so again, the invitation to participate doesn't necessarily mean having to ask somebody to do something, but it's just creating an environment in which that behavior is encouraged. And we've all seen like a little piano somewhere and just a sign that says play me, right? I mean, and people do it. And so thinking about ways, you know, some people aren't going to get on that piano even though they can play because they're terrified of performing in public, but others will. And some people who can't play very well will play because they like to be the center of attention. So it's, you know, it's thinking about things like that. And so, you know, your bookstore might not have necessarily hardcore fans, but certainly the reason they're coming into your bookstore is because they are fans of something. And that's where your connection point is. So, you know, maybe it's thinking about in October when you're putting out for October, when the horror books come out and get featured, what might you do there that would bring fans of horror, fans of spooky things in, and maybe even let them participate, you know? What would that be? And when you start to think about it that way, like, oh, we're going to decorate the store, we're going to do something interesting up here. You know, maybe you build something interesting where you let people pull up, instead of the bookstore always curating. Maybe you have an area where you all curates things, and maybe there's an area where you allow your fans to go pull a book from the horror section and place it up front because it's their favorite, you know, and you let them do it. You know, they once the slots are filled, that's what's up there for the day, you know, or something like that. I mean, I'm just kind of riffing here, but because you know your customers. But those are the kind of things, like offering fans an opportunity to share what they love. That's a huge, easy call to action, you know?
I've seen people with tables that said, you know, chalk and write your favorite mystery novel or your favorite horror novel or your favorite something like that that's collaborative. We keep a puzzle in the back that is partially done. It's a easy puzzle. It's a Harry Potter puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
It gets finished 5 times a day.
Yes.
You know, finished, unfinished, finish, unfinished, and it's a touchy kind of thing.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking about it, when you said that, I was wondering, what if we came up with trivia questions or with true criminal kinds of people and asked them to connect them with their book, and if they connect them with their book, they get a prize, or they get or you know, something. This idea of involvement. And I apologize, I was taking notes that I thought to myself, and instead I'm saying them to everybody. But anyway, so
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about smaller format things in the store, because you know we don't have any space to really build anything, or one of the reasons.
By the way, Brad, I explained to Mike ahead of time that you do author events on the sidewalks, which I think he thought was terrific.
Well, that's what I was going to talk about, though, is Bookstore Romance Day. For the last 3 years, we've had authors out front, you know, local from the Bay Area, romance authors, Harlequin, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of promotion around it. We had chocolate tasting and wine tasting to go along with it, and there just was no response at all to it, except for, once again, the authors buy each other's books, which is a little something, but it's not worth the time it takes and money it takes to promote and do those things. But so I was thinking about, you know, what kind of smaller format things
does your bookstore typically do a lot of business in romance books?
Well, you know, I guess it depends upon what's on TikTok. Colleen Hoover, you know, drives lots of people, but that's kind of a trend. I mean, we had a really big push for about 6 months with her, and now I've kind of seen that peak.
Yeah.
But no, generally not.
Yeah, see, that's probably why, because you were creating an experience for a group of people who aren't actually regularly looking at your store. And I think for a bookstore, you have to start at what are people buying, because that's the first group of people who are going to learn about something. And so, you know, if you're doing brisk business in historical fiction, then it's probably worth looking at that, because that's where you start your core audience doing things, and then and find success with that, and then branch out.
Yeah, we did do quite a bit of social media stuff, you know, boosting and paying for Facebook and Instagram and those kinds of things. So I thought we would have gathered some bodies for a one-day thing, but it really just, this year I decided to pass on Bookstore Romance Day because it just didn't do it for us.
Yeah, I also think, to be honest, I think those kinds of holidays are a little bit overdone. They tend to be like noise for people. But you know, like for instance, a bookstore romance day, for me, like if you're doing a day event, you need to do a bunch of things to lead up to it. So for example, on social media, I might turn around and go, thinking about participation, I might say, you know what, let's encourage for the month leading up to it, let's put out an interesting, like really nice pens and stationery, and invite people to write a love note to their favorite romance book. and they can do it anonymously, but you'll post them up and then maybe you photograph them and start posting them on your social media page, which is like, again, it ties into, okay, the theme of romance, you're asking for a romance book, but also you're inviting people to share something they love and have a little fun with it, and then incorporating those elements back into your social media where people see, oh my God, look, my letter is featured on here online, and you're tagging, you can tag, you can always ask when people submit, if you want us to tag you on social, leave your tag. Those are the ways you really will grow an audience. The paid media is good, and you don't want to pay to boost those kinds of posts, because those kind of posts should be generating their own attention. You're going to pay for the posts where you've got opportunities to either sell a book directly through Instagram, or if you're promoting some kind of call to action very, very specifically, then that's good for paid media. For these other types of engagement, these are the things you want to do just on an ongoing basis.
Whoa, baby. A lot of ideas there. No, I've got a bunch of notes.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things where you're just looking, the concept of leaving white space is really about just leaving a space for people to kind of imprint themselves onto it in some way. And sometimes that's individual, and sometimes that's, more expressive and more public. But, there's a, but I do think tapping, the reality is that as a bookstore owner, you are tapping into many, many different types of fandoms, and your sales are going to tell you which fandoms you already have a good lock on. And your lowest hanging fruit is, how do I get more of those fans coming to my bookstore over any other bookstore, right? So if you're doing pretty good business in horror books, then I promise you, for every one customer who's buying books from you, there's 10 others who are buying books on Amazon and someplace else, because they don't think that your bookstore is necessarily a home for them. And as soon as you do something that invites them in and lets them participate, your bookstore becomes their home, where they're going to go to look for horror books. So I would recommend, and again, that's not a one size fits all answer, because that all depends on where you're located and the curation of your bookstore and all of that. So, but you have the data to see where your core fandoms are.
So I'm wondering if we could take the example we were talking about just before you came on the call and kind of do something concrete together. And in the moment with it'll challenge these ideas for hitting in a very pedestrian sort of way. We're trying to connect newsletters and this basic block and tackling or whatever the effort that we're doing with newsletters with significance all the way through the marketing chain. And as you're saying, I'm really intrigued about letting them have some white space. So if we do good storytelling in our newsletter, make it compelling, make it interesting, and introduce a theme. So I've done that I used my grandmother's 100th birthday, or what would have been her 100th birthday. And she was a person who was heavily involved in school, heavily involved in cooking, heavily involved in a lot of different kinds of things. I've done a display around that. We've got tea towels that, connected to her actual recipes, which people who are traveling, they might like a Southern recipe that here is connected to the store. Got her cookbook and connected to Ann Patchett and her letter writing. So this is just a display that kind of connects and makes that come alive. What would be the next step in creating? How do I take that theme or that idea and create fan space or create people space, white space for people?
Yeah.
What could I do?
I mean, it's interesting. So this is about your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I might invite your customers to celebrate their grandmothers. Maybe create another little space there where you can put the pictures of grandmothers from your customers. That's the kind of thing people would love to do, and maybe you even have a little digital frame where people send your picture, tag us with the picture of your grandmother and her favorite book or something, and we'll display it, and you just can have it running on a TV loop or something, Those
I
kinds of things are easy to set up.
her as a person of plenty, and I thought about asking, who's your person of plenty? Who's your person that taught you about plenty? Which is not a financial kind of condition. It's really a spiritual kind of condition and an attitude. So we could do something like that. I guess people could bring in recipes and add them to the recipe box. And we could, that would be a grandmother recipes that get added to a community box. We could do, I don't know, anybody on the call think of any ideas, any ways to do that?
That's something you could offer to publish is my grandmother's cookbook and collect recipes from the community.
Yeah, community cookbook project.
Those kinds of projects are a lot of fun because it's almost like the kind of thing where you could leave it running for a year, and then you can partner with like the kinds of shops that sell gourmet ingredients, where your bakers and your cooks are buying the ingredients, right? Then you can kind of work a partnership, like submit your best recipes, or and if they're themed or something fun, and then we're going to publish them. Everyone who submits a recipe gets a copy of the book.
Well, one of the things that, we want to sell books. So my grandmother read books like detective novels. I mean, she really always had a lap full of them and just read them page by page. And I imagine she's not alone in that. Is there something we could do with that? I mean, can anybody think of something we could do that's in the lines of what Mike has been talking about? Immersive experience.
Yeah, I mean, like when you talk about detective books or mysteries, for example, you could literally have a mystery play out in your bookstore that that you let people know. Like, for instance, here's something at the front desk. If you grab this thing, it's a bookmark and it's got a tiny little story with a clue. And if you can unpack the clue, you go to this shelf for this book and then open it up to page 13 and there's a word circled or something like that leads you somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of fun things you can do in your store for people like that. So you could be like, during mystery month, for instance, we have a mystery in the store, and if you solve it, you get your name on the board. Something as simple as that. You'll attract a certain kind of person. Or if you're selling puzzle books, you can do like this store. There's a puzzle in the store to solve. Like that. Those are kind of fun ways where you give people something interesting to do. You send them around your store. What's interesting to remember is that you always want to think about the output of it, because generally speaking, you get a smaller group of people who actually want to participate. So you want to make sure their participation is ending up with something that you can then share out on your social feeds, And what it does is it turns your social feeds into something that reflects the community of people in your bookstore rather than you pushing out content to sell books. But that content also achieves the same goal of helping you sell books.
Well, and we all share the Where's Waldo thing, and this was my first Where's Waldo moment, and I was admittedly unenthusiastic about the whole thing. I sort of just let it happen, but fortunately, we had a couple of staff that were just crazy about the idea and went around to 20 partners, got gifts, got social media, dressed up, got balloons, pin the whatever on the Waldo, got cupcakes donated. It turned into quite a nice event that was, as you said, making a memory for a lot of people. And we were really proud of the staff person who took that on. And that's one of the things that I'm discovering is that I don't have time. Ashley doesn't have time to make this magic happen. But a lot of times the connection can be with a motivated staff person who really wants some reins.
You can also think about partnerships, right? Like, for instance, there are here in Brooklyn, there's multiple spaces for people who love games and puzzles. Some of them are cafes that are all about come out and play games here and have cafes. And some of them are actually like, they run after school programs for kids where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or they're playing, or they're all speed cubing, or they're solving puzzles, or they're doing something in STEM. But it's all related. And, those are kind of interesting organizations to play with, because you can go to them and say, hey, you know what? We'd love it if your kids who are involved in Dungeons and Dragons were interested in creating a fun game in our store for fans, or something like that. And you can actually get people who will do it just out of the sheer fun of doing it. There are people in your communities who consider themselves puzzle masters, which is a name that, if you look up, you'll find them. There are people who love to make puzzles for other people. That's how Wordle was created. It was just some guy went, I'm going to make a puzzle for my for my wife, and he made it and she loved it. And then he shared it with a few people, and then boom, New York Times bought it. So
Yeah, I play it every day.
yeah, these are things that, but it started as a gift, literally started as a gift. And I think these are things that are, you can get people in the community to engage, because people who like to make puzzles rarely have an opportunity to make puzzles on such a public scale. You know what I mean? Or do things like that. And oftentimes they'll just do it for the sheer joy of doing it. And sometimes when you start to do these kinds of things, you'll find people will approach you. Like if you did a mystery one, you'd be surprised. You find somebody come out and go, you know what? I love music books and I'm a huge music fanatic. I'd love to do something like that around music. And then you turn around and go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let's talk to me about what you want to do. Next thing you know, you've got people coming to you wanting to do those things. I mean, it happens with us all the time. Whenever we do something, we get emails from people who are like, I want to make something like this. And for us, of course, we're like, yeah, no, that's not us. We're not that company. But if you can tap into that spirit in your community, chances are those people are already coming to your store.
Wow. Any other thoughts or questions on this in this area?
Yeah, we did a similar, not the cookbook thing, but we just threw out a call on social media a couple of weeks ago and said, tell us our favorite book, and tell us your favorite book right now, or your favorite book you've read this year so far. And, we'll post a list of them on our website, and just threw it out there to see kind of what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we got 90 something responses in something like 48 hours, and go, oh crap.
That's wonderful.
And then, yeah. And then they're going, 3 days later, they're going, the list isn't up yet. Post a list.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So then what I did is I took those books and created a bookshop list, a list on our bookshop of those things. And I social posted about it again. And then it's going to go in this Sunday's newsletter that, the list is available. It's on the website. It's on bookshops. You can shop and learn and more of any of the books. And then we're creating an in-store display to honor their selections. And that's how we put it. We're also going to create an in-store display to honor your selections. In retrospect, I should have gone smaller first, but again, I need to test it. But I'm thinking, the next step as we do that is to then narrow that down. Because I did say in the first one, I said, look, a lot of you mentioned classics. We're going to build a separate classics list.
Yep.
And then we can feature that.
Break it down by genre, or by
exactly.
If you've got a big book coming out in a genre, you can go like, okay, let's take advantage of this big release by highlighting other things in the genre. Yeah.
Yeah. And every month pick a different thing, mystery, cookbooks, thrillers, horror, October, and pick every one as a different month, send out that social post at the beginning of the month, and then tie.
Yep.
That's also tied all together.
That's also a great way to build anticipation for a big book release that people are pre-ordering and wanting to come in for. When you've got one of those, like often happens with a fantasy or a sci-fi book or a series or something by a beloved author. Sometimes it's fun even before the book comes out. Be like, Stephen King's new book is coming out next month. In the meantime, what's your absolute drop dead favorite King book or horror book or haunted house book if he's writing a haunted house story? Things like narrow it down like that, because people love that. And oftentimes it's a lot easier for people to actually think of their favorite haunted house book if they love those kinds of books than it is to just think about their favorite horror book. Because that becomes a thing where like, oh my God, I've read so many, or my favorite, for me, it would be, historical fiction. I'd be like, oh my God, which one is my actual, is it Kevin Baker's Dreamland? Is it, what is it? I don't know, and like, but if it's more narrow, like here, what's your favorite book about, what's your favorite New York historical fiction for a New York bookstop? I'd be able to
World War II,
right away. Yeah. So narrowing it down sometimes boosts participation.
I love that. And we've used cardstock in our, black cardstock that we write on with gold writing. But I'm thinking in another idea, instead of just having a bookshelf that honors everybody's favorite books, which is a great thing, or a table that does that, you could incorporate those throughout the stack and put shelf talkers that have a special color or a special something that you just used out of cardstock folded in the shelf or as a bookmark. So that people know when they see that color, they're seeing somebody's favorite this month. And like, October it could be an orange cardstock thing that gets stuck in the month, and then you write the name of the person who loves it on it, and it's an easy display that isn't a display. It's just integrated throughout. So,
and there are things you can do that are purely digital, using just basic tools that everyone's using now that are deep engagement. So, for example, if you were like, if I was thinking about romance books, what I might do is I might say, okay, romance, like I would ask people to say, you could use things like Spotify collaborative playlists as a way to turn around and post a question, post a link, post a Spotify link to the song that represents your favorite character in a romance novel and why. Or something like that. And then, or maybe you pick out a character, from a romance novel that's got a series, and you say, pick the song that makes you think of this character all the time. And you'll get fans posting songs, and then you can go like, yeah, we're going to play the collaborative playlist in our store next week. And whenever you come in, you'll hear these songs. Really basic, like doesn't require you to build anything or do anything except have a Spotify account and someone to take the time to manage it. Now, the good thing is that almost every school has a marketing department, and those marketing departments, there are students who need to learn social media, and you can easily get an intern every semester. You might have to pay a little bit of money. Sometimes they don't, depends on the school. But if you work with the school, there's no reason you can't get a social media intern from the schools or that teach marketing and advertising for your bookshop. And if you start by building out here's what we do and here's what we're doing, and the fact that you give these young folks opportunities to succeed because you give them metrics like, I want to grow engagement, which is different than growing number of followers and is actually better, right? Like, for instance, if you go, I've got 10,000 followers, but I only ever get 5 comments. You turn around and go, that's not good. It means my stuff isn't being seen by the people who are actually even following me. So you turn around and go, I want to get, if I've got 1,000 followers, I want to be getting 100 comments every post. Charge your intern with figuring that out and give them a little room to play. I mean, all you have to do is you have to manage them, and you have to approve their posts before they go live to make sure they're not doing anything that's going to be harmful. But those are enormous helps. I mean, we use interns even sometimes for Campfire in that way, where we charge them with managing our own social feeds, which we're neglectful of. But we're a B2B company. You all are B2C. So that's way more important for you than it is for us.
It's fascinating. You're making me think that I've really missed an opportunity. We had one of our young high schoolers was like, hey, why don't we do a Barbie display and do it all in, blah, 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 in pink, or pull in books or whatever. And I sort of, I said, if you're going to do a display, think about a true theme, like your statement around Barbie or what you feel around, something that is personal. And I kind of made it harder than it had to be by asking too many questions. And we don't have a Barbie display. But I've noticed everybody else, including NVR, New Voices, New Rooms, had a Barbie bookseller booth, and I'm thinking I'd missed feeding that energy, because if I had said yes to Eliza and said, yes, Eliza, I think that's a great idea. Let's figure out what we can do with that invites people in. There's potential in there that ties to this idea of Beyond Bookstores, looking at what's happening in the world, what's happening in their worlds, and connecting everything together in a way that feels relevant and accessible.
Yes. That I would say that if you have an employee that comes to you with an idea where they want to promote something, I would say 99% of the time the answer should be yes. If it's not going to cost you a lot of money, because that employee is tapping into a passion. And the more you can explode that, because what'll happen, even if that display isn't super successful, your other employees are going to see, oh, if I want to do something that I love, I just have to ask, and I'll get a little bit of time and some support to do that. Because your employees are out there and they're reading the culture, and they might not be marketers, but they're looking at what people are talking about and they're engaged. And so when they have an idea like that, you definitely want to lean into it and you want to encourage it. Like I would even encourage it now, like, when you see something, what are you excited about that's coming up, over the holidays? Because they know the books and movies and cultural events that they're excited about. And some of those are going to be huge.
Well, in that case, I didn't immediately see the book connection. And so I usually am very much embracing everything.
Lisa, I have a million notes on this because Mike always gets me going. I love all his ideas. But one thing is that if you take the principle of doing something that's provocative, just your Barbie display is probably too broad in this spirit of narrowing down to get people to act. There's a lot of discussion about Oppenheimer versus Barbie. So if you said, and it's two different audiences, and last time we were talking about a young audience and an old audience, and boy, does Oppenheimer and versus Barbie illustrate that. By the way, I don't think Oppenheimer is a very
well,
good
if you did something simple, like set up a shelf or two shelves opposite each other, like an aisle, and one is pink and filled with everything you can imagine, but also books on feminism. Like you can cover the whole range of things that the Barbie movie talks about. And then on the other side, you have Oppenheimer, and it's dark and it's, bleak. You can put images there, but you literally have, there you go. And you can have Barbenheimer, up top. So you can play with these things as they happen in culture.
And you could put a little container and then glass beads like of the right color, and people can vote for which one.
Yes, like black beads and pink beads, right? And then, that's a great idea, and it's super visual and fun. And then I'm thinking about like, oh my God, if you could probably go on eBay and buy tons of old used Barbies pretty cheap, and then turn around and invite people to come in and make their own weird Barbies, like the one character in the movie. Invite kids to come and make your own weird Barbie. We got scissors to cut her hair and markers to make her up, and who's got the best weird Barbie. That's like a strange enough thing where people go, oh, that's fun.
I've got the photo op that they did at New Voices, New Visions, Envy, and they created a Barbie box that you stood in. It was book loving Barbie, and so with a fake stack of books. But what if you had people select their own, Barbie profile with their stack of books, and it's like, I'm going to dress up and here I am, or here I am, my Barbie, whatever. That would be something that we could fake out or do in the store.
Or even something as simple as like, when something as big as the Barbie movie is coming out, can you make, pink dust jackets? And so when you buy a book, you get a free pink dust jacket for your book. Something as simple as that. It's fun, maybe it's got something fun on it. So
yeah, Jill?
So Mike, do you have any advice? So I didn't realize the Barbie movie was going to be that big. And I think it caught a lot of people by surprise because they're like, theaters are dead, blah, blah, blah. So how much time do you have after something like that where you can still capitalize on it if you were taken, aback and you weren't ready? Like, I feel like I might have missed it if I try and do something Barbie right now, but what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's tricky, that's a tricky one because keeping an eye on pop culture is kind of part of my job on behalf of my clients. So I'm constantly scanning what's coming out and what looks like it's getting buzz, because buzz is really what you're measuring, like how many people are talking about it. And the thing is like the Barbie movie has been talked about ever since it was announced, like when it went into production, because you had a filmmaker who's not a traditional big budget filmmaker. She's somebody who has made really compelling, important films with strong messages in them, which was a little bit, and she's more of an indie filmmaker. So when she got the Barbie job, and then you have, it kind of went, oh, this just became interesting to a lot of people. And then it was just kind of a thing. And you're right. Those things don't tend to amp up until the studios start dumping a lot of money into them. And they don't generally put those things out in public until right before the release. but it is like, if you're following fandoms, and that's what I was saying by like, you know what fandoms you are already serving by your book sales. It would be good to engage with those fandoms online, in the sense of like, okay, if you're selling a lot of horror books, you should be eyeballing what the people in the horror Reddits and the horror literature Reddits and the horror movie Reddits are talking about, because that's going to give you a sense of like what's playing and what's going on. And even things as simple as like, you have outlets like Shudder that put out documentaries on horror genres, which could be an opportunity to tie into something going on in the bookstore. But that means that they're going to be promoting this, and it's going to be in culture, at least the themes. So how can you piggyback on something like that? Something that's
interesting to me is, it just made me think, we just had Taylor Swift here in the Bay Area, not in Morgan Hill. That would have been crazy. But it's kind of the same thing. It's like this renaissance or something of beautiful power, or celebration of beautiful power, or pink power, whatever. But it really means women that can be beautiful and thoughtful and all those things all together. And that's something that we might figure out another way to celebrate that.
Well, the discourse around the Barbie movie in particular has been fascinating, because you can see it on LinkedIn, you can see it on Instagram, you can see it on Reddit, you can see it on Facebook, and it goes all sorts of places, right? Like, and when you look at the Barbie movie, I sit there and go, oh, so this could, a thing that taps into Barbie movie could tap into books with feminist themes, or it could tap into books. One of the things that a lot of people were hoping for, what they were hoping this movie would make $1 billion, which it did, because one of the most frustrating things about movies is that the studios still, the men that run the studios still generally act like, when a movie aimed at women, made by women and for women largely, not excluding men, but just made with the female point of view, studios tend to always go, oh, that was a fluke, it'll never happen again. As opposed to, this is an underserved audience, and we put something in the market that clearly they want, we need to get more. They don't do that with women's movies still. So, an opportunity to maybe pull out all the books that highlight the greatest female filmmakers, and maybe the filmmakers, you find an interview with Greta Gerwig, who directed Barbie movie, where she talks about her influences, and then pull that out. And here's some books on these things. I'm just trying to, there's a lot of things that tap into that desire. And so finding what's right for your bookstore, what's the right angle for your bookstore is key, as opposed to just kind of trying to do.
Yeah, and I was also going to say, in terms of time and to do all this, that I found that the last agency I helped found that after Mike, my son, as a music producer, would tell me, "Oh, I just produced a record for a new record," and I'd say, "Well, who's the band?" He would say something. He'd say Beirut or War on Drugs, and I'd say, "Oh, interesting." I'd go into the office and I'd go to the youngest person in the office and say, "What do you think of War on Drugs?" And they go, "Wow, he did that," And so I think the younger employees are much more tapped into pop culture than we are. So that's a really important, and that's a good reason to get interns in. The intern that's doing your social media, no matter how skilled they are, is very tuned into what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do with an intern or somebody looking at social media is I would go a month out, right? Like now, first week of August is when they should be looking at September and October and November. And the first thing they would do is build out a calendar that has all the important things happening in pop culture that month, in your both locally and nationally, right? So on the local level, it will be events happening, things going on. On a national level, it'll be huge movie releases that are going to have $1 million spends against them. New plays on Broadway, those kinds of things. Just all pop culture, music, new albums dropping. Another Taylor Swift album drops. That's an opportunity to take the Taylor Swift idea that you didn't engage in when she was in town and do it in conjunction with the drop. You might even be able to work out an alternate display with a local record store where you put a few of their records in your store and they put a few of the books in theirs, and and share the love.
Mike,
Yeah,
at
we-
least on a national level, does this not exist? Content already exists somewhere that we could just pay for instead of having to build it all ourselves, each of us?
You mean like calendars and things?
Like a national pop culture calendar, like.
Oh.
Yeah,
It's a new product you could create, you know, as a sideline to your business.
It probably is, but you know, so many times it's very specific. You know what I mean? Like the thing is that when you're having it built for you, it's like you're using the data that you have to inform, like, okay, these are the fandoms that we're currently serving that are coming in here all the time. You go like romance, historical fiction, I don't know, mysteries, right? Okay. So then you're going to look through that calendar with that lens in mind, looking for the events that line up with those things, as opposed to a calendar that's just littered with so many things. It's kind of hard to find the gems.
So
You know?
bookstores in first week of October is banned books Books Week that the libraries and bookstores do something with. I would love to hear a fresh take on how we could do some white space and participatory stuff with that. Like, you know, tell us what book you would ban, or what would you like to ban in life, or just something silly, crazy.
Yeah, or maybe your favorite banned book. You know,
Yeah, well, we do a lot of that. We put up caution tape, and we have we put large Post-it notes over the book covers, and we tell why the book was banned, where it's being challenged and banned, and have a brief explanation on it, because it does promote conversation. But what's something fun that would be a little bit more
again, just riffing, and the way this is not the way we tend to work. We tend to go in and go, okay, let's look at banned books and the culture around banned books and what people are saying, and we look for something a little more tangible. But I might do something like, I might create a little I might take a bookshelf and put bars over the bookshelf so you can't actually touch any of the books, and have it all be banned books, and maybe offer people a way to parole, or you know, get a book out of the banned book sell some way. Might be kind of fun. Like, you know, then you have people pulling their favorite books, and then you have a shelf like these released out of there by people in our community, you know, which is a different way of saying, what do you recommend? But it's kind of fun, and it kind of goes to like, oh my God, and also speaks to like, look at all these books that have been banned, and all the important books, and look at the ones that people in our community think are important. I mean, that's the kind of thing where you do that, and then you have enough books out here, and you send a picture to your local newspaper, because that's kind of an interesting thing about the community, you know, local or local bloggers, if you've got anything like that, or post it on your social media feeds. Here's the banned books that were so meaningful to people, they donated money to a banned book fund or something like that in order to release them, you know, like drop a $2 in the pail, and you can break a book out of banned book jail or something like that. Again, just riffing, but I think creating that little story there of that experience elevates it beyond just tell us about your favorite banned book.
Yeah, when we were talking about it as a theme for this project, we were talking about using the free bookstores all over the place that are all over towns, putting banned books in there. And the idea would be to put banned books in there, and then there'd be a bookmark that said brought to you by your local bookstore, and it would name your store so that people could get them wherever they wanted them. But you have to link it back.
Or banned books that look really attractive in them, and that you can't open the libraries no matter what.
Well, we also,
you know, it's like, whoa, I want that book.
On it. Hey, we should probably
I have to get running.
Yeah, you kind of gave us more than you wanted to, maybe. So I really appreciate it, Mike. It's been fantastic. There's a whole section we were going to discuss about nuts and bolts of marketing, but we won't do that now. And I think what we'll do, Lisa, if you and I and a couple other people want to join us, is we'll follow up with a lot of ideas that we would have mentioned had we had more time, because Mike, you've been extraordinarily, as always, provocative and wonderful.
Good. Well, I hope
it's terrific.
So, you know, buddy of mine just self-published his own book and did a reading at a bookstore in Bensonhurst that I went to, and turns out it's the only bookstore within an insane number of blocks in South Brooklyn. You know, and loved seeing the vibrant community around that bookstore. So
yeah, no, when book whatever the bookstore, book court closed in Borum Hill,
Mhm.
the community felt like they lost their book center. You know,
Yeah.
a disaster.
Yeah, we have community bookstore here. That's
Yeah.
important in my neighborhood. Anyways, it was great to meet you all.
Me too.
Likewise.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you, Mike.
And then, you know, Brad, Sandy, Sherry, Jill, Lisa, thanks for all sticking around, Callie and Maggie. What we'll do, maybe, Lisa, is follow up with some notes from this call.